on to part 2. Now before I begin developing the two arguments from religious experience, I would like to spend some time further developing the difference between knowing, which I will define as a justified true belief, and showing one's beliefs to be true. Now I'd like to do this by discussing a specific religious experience, namely the witness of the Holy Spirit in a Christian worldview, which acts as justification to the believer. Hence this has an intended audience towards Christians, but all are welcome to watch if they would like to. Now I'd like to detail how a Christian can know that God exists via the witness of the Holy Spirit in the following ways. First, I would like to suggest that this specific religious experience is justified by its objective nature. Second, I would like to claim that false religious experiences of this nature do not undermine true religious experiences of this nature. And three, I would like to briefly develop Alvin Plantinga's thought that belief in God formed by belief-forming dispositions is a basic belief. Now first, let us examine the nature of this specific religious experience, which is the Holy Spirit. Contrary to popular belief, religious experience is not an exclusive subjective experience. Rather, Christians hold that religious experiences are a combination of internal experiences and external experiences via the agent being acted upon by the Holy Spirit, i.e. God. While subjective experiences aren't always wrong, the objectivity of many religious experiences provides a more solidified foundation to hold them justified. The action via the Holy Spirit serves as an objective witness to the individual believer. This working of the Holy Spirit functions just as objectively as, say, our sense experiences. Now this point will be detailed more in part 3. According to one theory of sense experience, our senses are acted upon by the objects in the external world, just as in religious experience, the subject of the experience is acted upon by God. Now again, this is not to say that such experiences do not create some subjective element during such experiences. However, the disparity between the cause, i.e. the external agent God, and the effect, example emotions, of such experiences should remain distinct. In other words, it would be erroneous to conclude that religious experiences are wholly subjective in the presence of an external agent or cause. Now, having briefly established the objectivity of religious experiences via the Christian worldview, we can turn to the subjective components of religious experience, example, their internal nature. The internal nature of such experiences denotes that the experience itself occurs in the internal world, which is distinct from the external physical world. But again, it is important to note that there are aspects of religious experiences that function within the external world, namely, the agency of God. Concisely, religious experiences contain both objective and subjective elements and differ from solely subjective experience, example, I am hungry. Here it is helpful to clarify when I speak of internal and external worlds, I'm using phenomenological language, meaning language that describes the way different things appear to us, and not literal language, which would suggest some sort of ghost in the machine ideology. Second, I would like to suggest that religious experience, again specifically the witness of the Holy Spirit, is justified in light of false claims to religious experience of this sort. Assuming for the sake of argument that if we have two radically different groups, each making claims about God's nature, it would follow that they cannot both be true, since this would lead to contradictions. How then can a claim of religious experience be self-authenticating in light of false claims? At least two responses can be offered in reply to this question. First, any conclusion that suggests that specific constituents of experience nullify the whole of the experience is guilty of the fallacy of composition. In other words, a conclusion that is drawn about the whole religious experience based on the individual parts within the whole, which would be the individual claims, is fallacious, since the mere fact that some parts have certain characteristics does not, in of itself, guarantee that the class, taken as a whole, has those characteristics. Second, William Lane Craig offers a thought experiment original with Alvin Plantinga that suggests that such a conclusion is erroneous. Here's the example. Professor A attempts to bribe another professor, Professor B, into writing a letter of recommendation for him. However, Professor B refuses and instead writes a letter reporting Professor A's attempted bribe, but soon after the letter reporting the crime disappears. Professor B levels an accusation against Professor A, thinking that all the evidence points to Professor A's absconding with the letter. He had the motive, he knew where the letter was, and he had the ability to access the office. However, it turns out that Professor A was on a walk in the woods, all alone, at the time the letter was stolen from Professor B's office. So Professor A is innocent even though he can't prove it, and he is within his rational rights in believing in his innocence despite the evidence. Thus, the reality of false claims of religious experience does not denote an overall rejection of religious experience. As they say, we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. False beliefs do not undermine true beliefs. To illustrate this point one last time, suppose you have 3 bottles of clear liquid in front of you, each labeled H2O, but you know that one actually has poison within it. You would not be justified in saying that the truth that 2 of the bottles have water in them is undermined by one of the bottles being falsely labeled. Now please note that within part 2, the part you are watching, we are talking about how the Christian can know that his beliefs are true. This is not an argument from religious experience attempting to show that God exists. Rather, part 2 again is simply claiming that a believer in Jesus as a Christian can be confident in knowing God via his or her religious experiences, again specifically the witness of the Holy Spirit. Third, I'd like to briefly unpack Alvin Plantinga's thought that belief in God is a properly basic belief via Reformed epistemology. According to the broad foundationalistic view, the belief that God exists is a belief-forming disposition and properly basic, i.e. a belief that is not derived or dependent on other beliefs. Just as individuals have a natural tendency to form perceptual beliefs under certain conditions, they also have a natural tendency to form such beliefs in God. Moreover, as belief-forming dispositions, various circumstances, for example an argument or a religious experience, may trigger or serve as justifying grounds for a basic belief without being part of a formal argument with premises and a conclusion. Differentially, there is also strong belief-forming dispositions to not believe in God via what the Christian worldview calls the fall. Since the fall, humanity desires autonomy from God, and thus there is a competing belief-forming disposition. Lastly, it is argued that the majority of believers do not come to believe in God via arguments such as those found in natural theology, but from other nondescript ways. Thus, on the view of Reformed epistemology, arguments are not necessary, but they are not useless either. There is a difference in needing an argument and having an argument to bolster or confirm a belief. Now, I will grant that Reformed epistemology seems to presuppose a lot about Christianity. However, its root in broad foundationalism does not, and the basicality of belief in God via this theory of epistemology is sustainable. Using foundationalism as a source of epistemic justification in comparison to coherentism, let's say, basic belief in truth of reason seem to be a better explanation, or better explained rather, by foundationalism than coherentism. Moreover, the avoidance of a regress of justification in the role of experience and perceptual beliefs, this seems to offer, in my opinion, a better normative view of our noetic structure than coherentism. Thus, a Christian can be justified via the self-authenticating witness of the Holy Spirit due to the objective nature of the experience, number 1. Number 2, to the reality that a false belief does not undermine a true belief, and 3, the nature of a basic belief being formed via belief-forming disposition of the witness of the Holy Spirit. It follows, then, that a Christian can have a belief that God exists via religious experience, such as the witness of the Holy Spirit, and is justified in holding to it. Now again, please recognize that this is not an argument generalizing religious experience as an argument that God exists. Rather, this point is that holding a belief that God exists is justified without an argument. The implication of this point is this: if a believer were to discover that all arguments fail on behalf of theism, then the believer would still be justified in holding his belief that God exists via the basicality of justification that such a belief implies, despite there being no argument on his behalf.